I was 42 when my grandfather died, and I knew the family thought I was a fool. I had spent the last 15 years working by his side at an old hardware store he refused to sell, in a town most people left as soon as they got the chance. My cousins had all moved to cities with shining towers and expense accounts. I stayed behind, learning to fix broken pipes and match paint colors to faded walls, while the world around us changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The hardware store sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a brick building with a green awning that had seen better days. The sign above the door, Morgan's Hardware, had been there since 1962, the paint cracking a little more each year. I never suggested replacing it. My grandfather, Harold Morgan, wouldn't have wanted that. He believed in repairs, not replacements. Things are meant to last, Eliza, he would say, his hands steady as he showed me how to rewire a lamp or cut a perfect piece of glass. People just forget how to take care of them. I didn't have a fancy degree like my cousin Rebecca, who called once a month from her corner office in Chicago to remind us all how successful she had become. I didn't have 3 kids and a husband with political ambitions like my cousin Thomas, who sent Christmas cards featuring matching sweaters and forced smiles. What I had was calloused hands, a small apartment above the store, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. My mother called me once a week, always on Sunday evenings, always with the same question, "Are you still working at that store?" As if the answer might change, as if one day I would suddenly realize I had wasted my life. "Yes, Mom," I would reply, watching dust motes dance in the fading light of my kitchen window. "I'm still here." She would sigh, a sound I had memorized since childhood, the sound of disappointment wrapped in concern. "You could do so much more, Eliza. You have potential." Potential. Such a strange word. As if who I was now wasn't enough, as if my life was merely a waiting room for something better. I never told her about the elderly customers who came in not just for hardware but for conversation, for the comfort of being remembered. I never mentioned how I knew exactly which tools would last and which would break, or how I could look at a problem and see its solution before it was even fully explained. Some kinds of knowledge don't translate well over phone lines. Grandfather understood. He never asked about my potential or my plans. He simply taught me everything he knew, his voice growing softer over the years, his movements slower, but his mind as sharp as the chisels he kept in perfect alignment on the workbench. We worked side by side 6 days a week, opening at 7 and closing at 6, except on Wednesdays when we closed at noon. That was our time. We would drive his old blue pickup truck out to the lake, sit on the wooden dock he had built decades ago, and eat sandwiches while watching fish make ripples in the water. "This place will be yours someday," he told me on one of those Wednesdays, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The store, the house, this land. All of it." I nodded, not because I cared about ownership, but because I understood what he was really saying. He was entrusting me with his life's work, with the community he had built, with the responsibility of being the person others could depend on. "I know, Grandpa," I said simply. He patted my hand, and we sat in silence until the sun began to set. What I didn't know then was that the rest of the family had other ideas. My Uncle James, my mother's older brother, had been making trips to visit grandfather with increasing frequency in those final months. He would arrive in his gleaming SUV, dressed in clothes that seemed too new, too crisp for our dusty town. He would take grandfather to lunch at the only restaurant in town that served wine, and they would return hours later, my grandfather tired and quiet. I asked once what they talked about. "Business," grandfather said, the word hanging between us like an unfamiliar tool. "James has some ideas." I didn't press. I should have. I should have asked more questions, should have paid attention to the papers that sometimes appeared on the desk, should have wondered why James suddenly cared about a store and a town he had mocked for decades. But I trusted grandfather. I believed that some things were certain. The day he died was ordinary. A Tuesday in October, leaves turning gold and red outside the store windows. He had been slower that morning, his breathing a little labored, but he insisted on helping Mrs. Peterson find the right screws for her cabinet doors. "Brass," he told her, "will look better with your hardware." Then he sat down on the stool behind the counter, closed his eyes, and was gone. Just like that. No drama, no last words, just the quiet departure of a man who had lived exactly as he chose. The funeral was 3 days later. The entire town came. People lined up out the door of the small chapel, sharing stories about how Harold Morgan had helped them build their homes, fix their leaky roofs, choose the right tools for jobs they didn't think they could handle. "He taught me to believe I could do it myself," one man said, his voice breaking. I stood there in a black dress that felt too formal, accepting hugs from people whose names I sometimes couldn't remember, but whose faces I knew from years behind the counter. My family arrived like a storm front. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Aunts and uncles who had moved away to bigger cities, better opportunities. They hugged me briefly, their eyes already moving past me to assess the chapel, the attendees, the arrangements. "Such a simple service," my Aunt Helen murmured, as if simplicity were a failure rather than a choice. I didn't respond. Grandfather would have hated anything elaborate. After the service, everyone gathered at Grandfather's house, a 2-story farmhouse at the edge of town with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun. I had been living in the apartment above the store for years, but I knew this house as well as my own skin. I had helped Grandfather maintain it, painting the shutters every spring, replacing the porch boards when they warped, planting the vegetable garden that still produced tomatoes and green beans in neat rows. The family spread through the rooms like an invading army, opening cabinets, running hands along furniture, examining pictures in frames. "This dining set must be worth something," I heard one cousin say. "It's original 1950s. Another opened the china cabinet, lifting plates as if weighing their value. I stayed in the kitchen, making coffee and arranging the casseroles that neighbors had dropped off, pretending not to notice how they were already dividing the spoils. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Uncle James found me there, his tall frame blocking the doorway. "We need to talk about the will," he said without preamble. "Mr. Finch will be reading it tomorrow at his office downtown. 10 o'clock. I nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel that Grandfather had used for years, the pattern faded to almost nothing. "I'll be there," I said, keeping my voice neutral. James studied me for a moment, his eyes calculating. "It might not be what you expect," he said finally. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me with a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. That night, after everyone had gone back to their hotels or to the homes of relatives who still lived nearby, I sat alone on the porch swing, listening to the familiar creak of its chains. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the yard where I had played as a child, where Grandfather had taught me to identify constellations on summer nights. "The stars don't change, Eliza," he had told me. "People do. Remember that." I thought about what James had said, about expectations and surprises. I had never asked Grandfather about his will, had never wanted to seem eager for what would come after he was gone. But he had made promises, casual mentions over the years about the store, the house, his intentions. I had believed him because he had never given me reason not to. As I sat there swinging gently, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by dreams of empty shelves and locked doors. I woke before dawn, made coffee in the small kitchen of my apartment, and dressed carefully in clothes that would not impress my family but would have met with Grandfather's approval: clean jeans, a pressed blue shirt, boots that were worn but polished. I walked to the store, unlocked the door, and turned on the lights even though the sign in the window clearly stated, "Closed due to family bereavement." I needed the comfort of this space, the familiar smell of wood and metal and the lemon oil we used on the counters. I walked the aisles, running my fingers along the neatly organized bins of nails and screws, the row of hammers hanging in size order, the display of work gloves that I had arranged just last week. Everything in its place. Everything as it should be. I had learned that from Grandfather, the importance of order, of knowing exactly where to find what you needed. At 9:45, I locked up again and walked the 3 blocks to Mr. Finch's law office. It was a small building with a green door and brass numbers that I had helped install when Mr. Finch decided to move his practice from the second floor of the bank to his own space. "I need something that will last," he had told me when selecting the numbers. "Something with substance." I had chosen solid brass, had mounted them carefully on the newly painted door. They gleamed now in the morning sun as I approached. The rest of the family was already there, filling the small waiting room with expensive perfume and low conversations that stopped when I entered. My mother rose from her chair, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eliza, darling," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. You look tired. Are you sleeping at all? Before I could answer, Mr. Finch's door opened, and he gestured for us all to come in. His office was larger than the waiting room, with a wooden desk that dominated the space and chairs arranged in a semicircle facing it. Windows overlooked the town square, where the weekly farmers' market was just setting up, vendors unfolding tables and arranging produce as they had every Saturday for as long as I could remember. The normalcy of it, the continuation of routines, in a world that had fundamentally shifted, made my throat tight with emotion. We sat, an uneasy family portrait. Uncle James and Aunt Helen, their 3 adult children and various spouses. My mother, sitting slightly apart as if to distance herself from what was to come. Cousins from my father's side, who had less of a claim but had shown up nonetheless, drawn by the possibility of inheritance. And me, perched on the edge of a chair near the door, feeling suddenly, acutely aware of my work-roughened hands and practical clothes among their manicures and cashmere. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and opened a folder that sat before him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice formal but kind. "We are here to discuss the last will and testament of Harold James Morgan." He looked around the room, making brief eye contact with each person. When his gaze reached me, I saw something in his expression, a flicker of something I couldn't identify. Then he looked down at the papers and began to read. The will started with standard language, declarations of sound mind and body, revocations of previous wills. Then came the distributions. A series of small bequests, $5,000 to the local library, $2,000 to the historical society, $1,000 to the church though grandfather rarely attended. Personal items divided among family members, his collection of fishing lures to a cousin who had once shown interest, his books to another, his woodworking tools to an old friend who had taught him the craft. The room grew tense as these minor items were distributed, the real prizes still unmentioned. The store, the house, the land, the savings that everyone assumed had accumulated over decades of careful living. I sat motionless, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on Mr. Finch's face as he turned a page and continued reading. "To my granddaughter, Eliza Morgan," he read, and I felt the weight of every gaze in the room shift to me. "I leave the sum of $1. The words hung in the air, impossible, absurd. $1. A symbolic bequest, the kind given to acknowledge someone without actually giving them anything of value. I heard a snicker from somewhere to my left, quickly suppressed. My mother made a small sound, part surprise, part vindication. Mr. Finch continued without pausing, his voice steady. "To my son James Morgan, I leave my house and property at 247 Lakeside Drive, with all its contents and furnishings." Uncle James nodded slightly, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "The remainder of my estate, including Morgan's hardware store and all associated business assets, inventory, and accounts, I leave to Oak Ridge Development Corporation, with the stipulation that the property be developed to its highest and best use for the economic benefit of the community." Oak Ridge Development. I knew that name. It was James's company, the real estate development firm he had started 20 years ago, the one that specialized in turning small-town main streets into generic shopping centers with chain stores and parking lots. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room, leaving me lightheaded and disoriented. This couldn't be right. This wasn't what grandfather had promised. This wasn't what he had wanted. I looked up to find Mr. Finch watching me, that same unreadable expression on his face. Then he cleared his throat again and said, "That concludes the formal reading of the will. Are there any questions?" The room erupted in murmurs and half-formed inquiries, but I couldn't focus on any of them. $1. After 15 years of working by his side, of learning everything he had to teach, of caring for him in his final years. $1 and a room full of relatives who were trying not to smile at my humiliation. I stood abruptly, the movement causing my chair to scrape loudly against the wooden floor. The conversations paused, all eyes turning to me again. I expected to feel tears, anger, betrayal. Instead, I felt oddly calm, as if I were watching the scene from a great distance. "I need some air," I said to no one in particular, and walked out of the office without looking back. The morning sun was bright, almost painful after the dimness of Mr. Finch's office. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Around me, the town continued its Saturday routines. The bakery across the street had a line out the door, people waiting for fresh bread and the cinnamon rolls that sold out by noon. A couple walked by with a dog on a leash, nodding politely as they passed. Everything normal, everything changed. I started walking without a clear destination, my feet carrying me automatically through familiar streets. Past the diner where grandfather and I had eaten breakfast every Sunday after he stopped cooking for himself. Past the park where he had taught me to ride a bike, his large hand steady on the seat until I found my balance. Past the elementary school I had attended, where he had come to every science fair and holiday program, sitting in the front row even when my own parents couldn't make it. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of Morgan's Hardware. The morning sun reflected off the windows, making it impossible to see inside. But I didn't need to see. I knew every inch of that store, every product on every shelf, every creaking floorboard and flickering light fixture. I reached into my pocket for the keys, then stopped. Were they even my keys anymore? Was I trespassing now on property that belonged to Oak Ridge Development? A voice behind me broke my thoughts. I figured I'd find you here. I turned to see Mr. Finch, slightly out of breath as if he had been hurrying to catch up. He was holding his briefcase and a manila envelope I hadn't seen before. You left before I could give you this, he said, extending the envelope. Your grandfather asked me to give it to you privately, after the reading. I took the envelope with numb fingers. It was heavier than it looked, sealed with tape that had yellowed slightly with age. My name was written on the front in grandfather's distinctive handwriting, slanted and precise. What is this? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses, a gesture I had seen him make countless times over the years. I don't know exactly, he admitted. He gave it to me about 5 years ago, said it was for you alone, after he was gone. Said it would explain everything. He hesitated, then added, Eliza, I'm sorry about the will. I just read what was put in front of me. I nodded, still looking at the envelope. Thank you for bringing this, I said, the politeness automatic, ingrained. Mr. Finch looked like he wanted to say more, but after a moment he simply nodded in return, turned, and walked back toward his office, leaving me alone with whatever message my grandfather had left. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I unlocked the store, went inside, and flipped the sign to closed. The silence enveloped me, familiar and comforting. I walked to the back office, a small room with a desk that had belonged to my grandfather's father, a filing cabinet that was more organized than anyone would expect, and a coffee maker that had seen better days. I sat in the worn leather chair, placed the envelope on the desk, and simply looked at it for a long moment. Finally, I opened the envelope. Inside was a small brass key, the kind that might fit a safety deposit box, and a letter, several pages long, folded neatly. I recognized the stationery grandfather had always used, cream-colored with a subtle texture, the kind they didn't make anymore. I unfolded the pages, hands trembling slightly, and began to read. My dearest Eliza, it began. If you're reading this, then the reading of my will has happened, and you're probably feeling confused and betrayed. For that, I am deeply sorry. What happened today was necessary, though I know it doesn't seem that way now. I need you to trust me one more time. I paused, taking a deep breath. The familiar handwriting blurred slightly as tears threatened, but I blinked them away and continued reading. 15 years ago, when you first came to work with me at the store, I knew you were special. Not just because you're my granddaughter, but because you saw value in the things others dismissed. You understood that a hardware store isn't just about selling tools and nails. It's about helping people build and repair their lives, piece by piece. You learned every product, every solution, not because I made you, but because you genuinely cared. The letter continued, recounting memories of our time together, small moments I had almost forgotten. The spring we repainted the entire storefront together, arguing good-naturedly about whether the trim should be forest green or navy blue. What you don't know, the letter went on, is that about 5 years ago, your Uncle James came to me with a proposal. Oak Ridge Development wanted to buy not just my store, but the entire block. They had plans for a shopping center, apartments above, parking below. Modern, efficient, profitable. They offered a lot of money, Eliza. More than I ever thought this old place was worth. My heart sank. So grandfather had sold out after all. The promises, the years of training, all for nothing. I turned them down, the letter continued, and I felt a surge of relief. This store, this town, they aren't just real estate to me. They're a legacy. Your legacy, as I always intended. But James didn't take the rejection well. He started visiting more often, bringing paperwork, lawyers, architects with fancy drawings. He talked about progress, about my responsibility to the community, about how I was standing in the way of jobs and growth. And he talked about you. I stiffened, gripping the paper tighter. He said you were wasting your life in a dying business. That I was selfish to let you stay, to give you false hope about a future that couldn't last. He brought your mother into it, both of them insisting that I was doing you a disservice. That if I really loved you, I would sell the store and give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere with opportunities. I could imagine those conversations all too well. My mother's particular blend of concern and disapproval. James's confident assertions about what was best for everyone. And grandfather, perhaps feeling his age for the first time, wondering if they might be right. I almost gave in, the letter admitted. Not because I believed them, but because I started to doubt myself. Was I being selfish? Was I holding you back? Then came that day at the lake, when I told you everything would be yours someday, and I saw the look in your eyes. Not greed, not anticipation of ownership, but understanding of the responsibility. That's when I knew I had to protect what we had built, no matter what. The next paragraph explained the plan he had devised with Mr. Finch, a plan so simple and yet so effective that I couldn't help but admire it, even as I struggled to understand why he hadn't trusted me enough to tell me while he was alive. The will they heard today is a fiction, Eliza. Legal, binding in appearance, but ultimately meaningless. Because 5 years ago, I transferred ownership of the store to you. The papers are in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is enclosed with this letter. Box 247, same as our house number so I wouldn't forget. Everything is there, the deed to the store, the business license in your name, the documentation of the transfer of assets. You've owned Morgan's Hardware for 5 years. I just kept managing it for you while you learned everything you needed to know. I sat back in the chair, stunned. The key felt suddenly heavy in my palm. I owned the store. Had owned it all along, through all those conversations about the future, all those promises about someday. Grandfather had already made good on his word, had secured my inheritance long before anyone could challenge it. As for the house, the letter continued, I'm afraid that part of the will is real. It goes to James, along with the appearance of a victory over you. Let him have it. The house is just a structure, filled with things that can be replaced. What can't be replaced is what we built together, the knowledge I passed to you, the community that depends on us. That's the real inheritance, and it's already yours. The final pages of the letter contained practical instructions. The location of important documents, contact information for suppliers, advice about tax season and inventory management. Things he had already taught me over the years, now collected in one place as a reference. The last paragraph, though, was different. By now, the family is probably celebrating what they see as your humiliation. $1, while they divide what they think is the real prize. Let them laugh, Eliza. Let them believe they've won. Sometimes, the best victory is the one no one knows you've achieved. I've watched you grow from a hesitant girl into a woman of remarkable strength and integrity. I've seen you solve problems that stumped men twice your age. I've witnessed your kindness to people who offered nothing in return. These qualities, more than any property or business, are your true inheritance. From me, I am so very proud of you, my dear. Live well. Build something that lasts. Remember that I loved you enough to ensure you would never have to beg for what was already yours. Always, Grandpa. I sat in the silence of the office for a long time, reading and rereading the letter. Outside, I could hear the town going about. Its business, cars passing, the occasional voice or laughter from pedestrians. Inside, my world was realigning itself, pieces falling into new patterns that made both more and less sense than before. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at grandfather for the deception, not even at James and my mother for their manipulation. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet strength building inside me. Grandfather had trusted me with more than just a store. He had trusted me with a secret, with his reputation, with the careful engineering of a plan that allowed me to keep what mattered while letting the others believe they had won. Eventually, I folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, and slipped both into my pocket along with the key. I stood and walked through the store, touching familiar items like I was seeing them for the first time. My store. My inventory. My responsibility. I reached the front door, turned the sign from closed to open, and took my place behind the counter. The bell above the door jingled 20 minutes later. It was Mrs. Peterson, returning with the brass screws grandfather had helped her select just days before. I'm so sorry about your grandfather, Eliza, she said, placing a small container of homemade cookies on the counter alongside the screws. He was a good man. Yes, I agreed, ringing up her purchase. The best I've ever known. Will you be keeping the store open? She asked, the question casual but weighted with concern. I knew she was really asking if our town was about to lose another business, another piece of its identity to development and progress. I smiled, the first genuine smile since grandfather had died. Yes, Mrs. Peterson. The store isn't going anywhere. Neither am I. She seemed relieved, patting my hand before gathering her bag. Harold would be pleased. This place wouldn't be the same without a Morgan behind the counter. After she left, other customers began to trickle in. Some came for actual hardware needs, others, I suspected, came to offer condolences and perhaps to satisfy their curiosity about what would happen now. I helped them all, answering questions, finding the right parts, offering advice just as I had done every day for 15 years. By closing time, the news of the will reading had spread through town. I could see it in the pitying glances, the slightly too cheerful greetings, the careful avoidance of certain topics. Poor Eliza, they were thinking. Left with nothing but a symbolic dollar while the vultures circled what had always been meant to be hers. I locked up at 6, just as I always did, and walked upstairs to my apartment. The rooms felt different. Now, knowing they were truly mine, that no one could take them away. I made a simple dinner, ate by the window overlooking the town square, and then picked up the phone. I called Mr. Finch first. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. Eliza. I was hoping I'd hear from you. I read the letter. I said simply. I'll come by the bank on Monday morning. He seemed to exhale with relief. I'll meet you there at 9, if that works. Harold made me promise to help you through this transition. Thank you, I said. For keeping his secret. For giving me the letter. Your grandfather was a wise man, Mr. Finch replied. And he loved you very much. More than the others will ever understand. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of the whiskey grandfather had kept for special occasions. I raised it in a silent toast to the empty room, to the memory of a man who had seen further than anyone gave him credit for, who had protected what mattered most in the only way he knew how. The phone rang again just as I was getting ready for bed. My mother's number flashed on the screen. I considered not answering, but something in me, perhaps the newfound security of knowing what grandfather had done, made me pick up. Eliza, she began without preamble, I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you all right? I'm fine, Mom, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Well, it's been quite a day, hasn't it? She paused, perhaps waiting for me to agree or disagree. When I remained silent, she continued. I want you to know, I had no idea the will would be like that. Just $1, after all you did for him. It's not right. Is that what you think? I asked. That it's not right? Of course. Her voice rose slightly. James is already talking about selling the house. Did you know that? And that development company of his, they'll tear down the store, put up something modern. All your work, gone. I'm furious with your grandfather, I really am. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the warmth spread through me. You don't need to be angry on my account, Mom. I'm not upset. How can you not be upset? You devoted years of your life to that store, to taking care of him, and he left you nothing. Nothing. But listen, I've been thinking. You could come stay with me for a while, get back on your feet. There are jobs in the city, opportunities. You're still young enough to start over. The same argument, the same assumption that my life in this town was somehow less than, somehow a failure compared to what might have been. I had heard it for years, had sometimes even believed it myself in moments of doubt. But not anymore. I appreciate the offer, Mom, but I'm staying right here. I have everything I need. What are you talking about? You have an apartment over a store that's about to be demolished, and one symbolic dollar. How is that everything you need? I smiled into the phone, knowing she couldn't see it but unable to help myself. There's more to inheritance than what gets read in a lawyer's office, Mom. Grandpa taught me that. What does that even mean? Eliza, you're not making sense. The reading was very clear. Yes, it was, I agreed. Very clear indeed. I should go now, Mom. It's been a long day. But, she began, but I had already ended the call. I slept deeply that night, better than I had since grandfather first became ill. In the morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my curtains. And the distant sound of church bells. Sunday. The store would be closed, as it always was on Sundays. Grandfather had been firm about that, insisting that everyone needed one day to rest, to remember there was more to life than commerce. I made coffee, stronger than usual, and took it out to the small balcony off my kitchen. From there, I could see most of Main Street, the buildings that had stood for generations, the newer additions that had come in recent years. The hardware store sat at the heart of it all, a cornerstone of the community in ways that weren't immediately obvious unless you had spent time behind its counter. A movement across the street caught my eye. Uncle James, standing on the sidewalk, looking up at my building with an expression I couldn't quite read from this distance. He was alone, dressed casually for once in jeans and a sweater, looking less like a successful developer and more like the uncle I vaguely remembered from childhood visits. I watched as he crossed the street and approached the store, peering in through the windows, his hand cupped around his eyes to block the reflection. He tried the door, found it locked as expected, then stepped back to look up at my apartment again. This time, he spotted me on the balcony. We stared at each other for a long moment, neither making a move to speak or wave. Finally, he nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything, and walked away, his pace unhurried. I sipped my coffee, wondering what he had been looking for, what he had hoped to see in the building that he thought would soon be his to demolish. The rest of Sunday passed quietly. I cleaned my apartment, did laundry, called a friend from high school who had moved away years ago but still checked in regularly. I didn't mention the will or the letter or the safety deposit box waiting for me at the bank. Those revelations could wait. For now, I wanted to sit with my knowledge, to feel its weight and substance without diluting it by sharing. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect fall day. I dressed with unusual care, choosing clothes that were practical but also dignified: dark jeans, a crisp white blouse, boots that grandfather had helped me select for their quality leather and solid construction. Boots should last a decade if they're made right, he had said, examining the stitching with expert eyes. These will see you through. Mr. Finch was waiting outside the bank when I arrived, his briefcase in one hand, a cardboard cup of coffee in the other. "Good morning, Eliza," he greeted me, his voice warmer than it had been in his office. "Ready?" "Ready," I confirmed, following him into the bank. The process was surprisingly simple. Mr. Finch had called ahead, so the bank manager was expecting us. We were led to a private room where the safety deposit box was brought. The key fit perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. Inside, just as grandfather had promised, were folders of documents, all meticulously organized and labeled. The bank manager left us alone to review them. Mr. Finch helped me understand the legal language, explaining each document's significance. The store had indeed been transferred to me 5 years ago, the paperwork executed quietly but with absolute legality. There were also insurance policies, investment accounts, and detailed instructions for accessing them. "Your grandfather was thorough," Mr. Finch observed, arranging the papers into neat stacks. "He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." I nodded, still absorbing the reality of what these documents represented. Not just ownership of a building or a business, but financial security, independence, the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. "What happens now?" I asked. "With the will, I mean. When does James find out that the store isn't his to give to Oak Ridge Development?" Mr. Finch smiled slightly, the expression making him look younger. "That's the elegant part of Harold's plan. The will specifies that Morgan's hardware goes to Oak Ridge, but legally, Harold couldn't will what he no longer owned. As soon as James tries to execute that part of the will, he'll discover that the property was transferred years ago. By then, you'll have had time to secure your position, to make it clear to everyone that the store is staying exactly as it is." "And the dollar?" I asked. "Was that just for show?" "Partly," Mr. Finch admitted. "It was Harold's way of making the others believe they had won completely. But there was more to it than that." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small box. "He asked me to give you this as well, once you had seen the documents." I opened the box carefully. Inside was an old silver dollar, tarnished with age, resting on a bed of faded velvet. A small note card lay beside it. "My father gave me this silver dollar when I opened the store in 1962, the card read in grandfather's handwriting. He said, 'A business that starts with silver will never see copper days.' It's brought me luck for 60 years. Now it's yours. Along with everything else that matters. The dollar in the will is just paper. This one has history." I lifted the coin, feeling its weight, imagining grandfather carrying it in his pocket all those years, a talisman of continuity and perseverance. A tear slipped down my cheek, the first I had allowed myself since his death. "He really did think of everything, didn't he?" I said softly. Mr. Finch nodded. "Harold was playing a long game, Eliza. He knew exactly what he was doing. We spent another hour going through the remaining documents, making copies of the most important ones, ensuring I understood exactly what I had inherited and how to protect it. When we finished, Mr. Finch walked me back to the store. "What will you do now?" he asked as we stood outside the familiar green awning. I looked up at the sign, at the name that had become mine in more ways than one. "Open up," I said simply. "Help people find what they need. Build something that lasts." I turned to face him, extending my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. For everything." He shook my hand firmly. "Harold would be proud," he said. Then he walked away, leaving me alone with my inheritance, both visible and invisible. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and flipped the sign to open. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the tools and supplies. That had been the backbone of this community for generations. My tools now. My supplies. My legacy to preserve and extend. The bell above the door jingled. My first customer of the day had arrived. I slipped the silver dollar into my pocket, feeling its solid weight against my hip, and stepped behind the counter, ready to begin. Word spread quickly in our small town. By Wednesday, most people knew that Morgan's Hardware wasn't closing, that I wasn't going anywhere, that the developers wouldn't be breaking ground on a shiny new shopping center where generations had bought their first hammers and learned how to repair leaky faucets. What they didn't know, what I hadn't shared, was that I had owned the store all along. Let them think I had found a way to stay on as manager, to maintain the business in honor of my grandfather. The truth was mine to hold close, a private victory in a battle most didn't even know was being fought. The first confrontation came on Thursday afternoon. I was helping a young couple choose paint for their first home, explaining the differences between finishes and primer types, when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see Uncle James standing in the entrance, his expression a careful blank, his expensive shoes out of place on our worn wooden floors. "Take your time deciding," I told the couple with a smile. "I'll be right back." I walked to the front of the store, wiping my hands on the canvas apron I always wore during work hours. "Uncle James," I greeted him, keeping my voice neutral. "What can I help you with today?" He glanced around the store, taking in the neatly organized shelves, the customers browsing in the back, the handwritten signs offering weekly specials. "You're still open," he observed, as if this were surprising. "Of course," I replied. "Why wouldn't I be?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Eliza, I think we need to talk. Privately." I gestured toward the back office. "We can use Grandpa's office. Though I suppose it's my office now." A flash of irritation crossed his face, quickly suppressed. He followed me through the store, past customers who nodded in greeting, to the small room where I had read Grandfather's letter just days before. I closed the door behind us, offering him the visitor's chair while I took Grandfather's seat behind the desk. "I've been trying to reach you," he began. "You haven't been answering your phone." "I've been busy," I said simply. "Running a hardware store takes time." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Eliza, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The store isn't yours to run anymore. According to your grandfather's will, it belongs to Oak Ridge Development now." I kept my expression neutral, channeling the calm certainty I had learned from watching Grandfather deal with difficult suppliers. "Actually, that's not correct. The store belongs to me. It has for 5 years. James blinked, confusion replacing confidence. "What are you talking about?" The will was very clear. "The will attempted to give Oak Ridge something that wasn't Grandpa's to give," I explained, opening my desk drawer and removing a folder containing copies of the transfer documents. "He signed the store over to me 5 years ago. Complete transfer of ownership. These papers are on file with the county, registered with the state. Morgan's Hardware belongs to me, legally and completely." I slid the folder across the desk. James opened it, scanning the documents with increasing disbelief. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Dad never mentioned this." "He didn't need to," I replied. "It was a private business decision between the previous owner and the new one." James looked up, his expression hardening. "You knew about this at the will reading. You let us all think you'd been left with nothing but $1. I shrugged slightly. "I didn't know then. Grandpa left me a letter explaining everything. Mr. Finch gave it to me afterward." "Finch," James repeated, understanding dawning. "He was in on this." "He was doing his job," I corrected. "Executing his client's wishes with discretion and professionalism." James closed the folder with a sharp snap. This feels like a con, Eliza. A manipulation. Why would Dad do this? Why would he make us all think the store was going to Oak Ridge if he'd already given it to you? I considered how much to reveal, how much of Grandfather's strategy to expose. I think, I said carefully, he wanted to protect the store from being pressured into a sale. He knew how much Oak Ridge wanted this property. This way, no one tried to convince me to sell before I was ready to make that decision for myself. And are you? James asked, leaning back in his chair. Ready to make that decision? Because Oak Ridge's offer still stands. More than stands, I'm authorized to increase it by 15%. That's a lot of money, Eliza. More than you'd make running this place for the next 20 years. I smiled, not unkindly. I know exactly how much I'd make running this place for the next 20 years, Uncle James. Grandpa taught me how to read a balance sheet before I was 21. The store is profitable, stable, and debt-free. And it's not for sale. Everything has a price, he insisted. Name yours. I shook my head. You're not listening. The store isn't for sale. Not at any price. James stood, frustration evident in the tight set of his shoulders. You're being stubborn. Just like Dad. He never could see the bigger picture, the potential in progress. He saw a different kind of potential, I replied, remaining seated. The kind that isn't measured in square footage or profit margins. The kind that builds communities instead of shopping centers. Communities change, Eliza. They evolve. This town needs jobs, tax revenue, modern amenities. My development would provide all of that. This town needs continuity too, I countered. Places that remember who they are, that maintain connections. Between generations. The store provides that. James sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Grandfather that it made my heart ache briefly. You won't be able to hold out forever. The economy shifts, online competition increases, big box stores expand. Sooner or later, you'll realize this was a mistake. I stood then, extending my hand across the desk. Maybe. But it will be my mistake to make, not yours. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have customers waiting. He hesitated, then shook my hand briefly. This isn't over, you know. The will reading, the dollar, the house, it was a public humiliation. The family won't forget. That easily. I don't expect them to, I replied, walking him to the office door. But I've learned that other people's opinions matter a lot less than doing what you know is right. I opened the door, gesturing him back into the main store. Feel free to stop by anytime you need hardware. Family discount is 10%. He gave me a look that hovered between admiration and annoyance, then walked out without another word. I watched him go, feeling neither triumph nor anxiety, just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The young couple was still deliberating over paint colors when I rejoined them. Sorry about that, I said. Family business. Now, where were we? Eggshell or satin for the bedroom? The days fell into a rhythm after that. I opened the store each morning at 7, just as Grandfather had done. I helped customers find the right tools, the correct parts, the perfect shade of paint. I ordered inventory, balanced the books, swept the floors, and changed light bulbs. Simple tasks, necessary work, the kind that built a business day by day, customer by customer. Sometimes I caught myself turning to share a thought with Grandfather, forgetting for just a moment that he was gone. The phantom conversations lingered in the air, half-formed questions that would never receive answers. But I found that I knew what he would say most of the time, his voice so clear in my memory that I could almost hear it. Check the inventory before you order more of those brackets. Mrs. Wilson always buys garden supplies in March, not April. Order early. That new supplier is cutting corners on the drill bits. Find another. A month after the will reading, my mother came to visit. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing a suit too formal for our town, her hair freshly colored to hide the gray. She stood just inside the entrance, looking around as if she had never seen the store before, though she had grown up visiting it when her father ran it. Mom, I said, surprised. I didn't know you were coming. She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. I thought we should talk in person. You haven't been answering my calls. I've been busy, I said, echoing what I had told James. But I'm glad you're here. Let me finish up with this customer, and we can go upstairs for coffee. 20 minutes later, we sat in my small kitchen, mugs of coffee between us. My mother looked out of place among my simple furnishings, her manicured nails and designer watch at odds with the second-hand table and mismatched chairs. The family is in an uproar, she began without preamble. James told everyone about the store, about how Dad transferred ownership to you years ago. People are saying they were deliberately misled, that the will reading was some kind of cruel joke. I sipped my coffee, considering my response. The will reading was exactly what Grandpa intended it to be. A protection. A protection, she repeated, disbelief evident. Eliza, it was humiliating. For everyone. James looked like a fool, announcing his development plans for property he can't touch. The rest of us sat there watching you receive $1, feeling sorry for you, when all along you had the most valuable asset. I'm sorry if it was uncomfortable, I said, meaning it. But Grandpa did what he thought was necessary. He knew there was pressure to sell, to develop. He wanted to make sure the store remained what it has always been. She shook her head. That's the problem with this family. So concerned with the past that we can't see the future. James's development could have transformed this town, brought in revenue, visitors, jobs. Instead, we're stuck with another generation running a hardware store that barely breaks even. The store does more than break even, Mom. Grandpa taught me well. We're profitable, sustainable, and we provide something this community needs. But is it what you need, Eliza? She asked, her voice softening slightly. You're 42 years old. No husband, no children, no life outside these walls. Is this really what you want for yourself? The question hung in the air between us, familiar and yet somehow different now that I knew the truth of my inheritance, now that I understood the choice had always been mine. Yes, I said finally. This is exactly what I want. Not because I'm settling or because I don't have options, but because I genuinely love this business, this community, this life I've built. She looked at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I never understood it, she admitted. Why you stayed when I couldn't wait to leave. This town always felt too small to me, too limited. I wanted more for you than what I ran from. I know, I said gently. But what looks like limitation to one person can feel like purpose to another. I'm not trapped here, Mom. I'm rooted. There's a difference. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Your grandfather saw that in you, didn't he? The rootedness. The belonging. Her voice caught slightly. He never saw that in me. He loved you, I said. In his way. He just understood that we were different kinds of people. She nodded, withdrawing her hand. Well, the family may not forgive him, or you, anytime soon. But I suppose I can try to understand. Just, don't shut me out completely, all right? Answer a call now and then. I will, I promised. And for the first time in years, I meant it. After she left, I closed the store early and walked to the cemetery on the hill overlooking town. Grandfather's grave was still fresh, the grass not yet fully grown over the disturbed earth. I stood before the simple headstone, hands in my pockets. The silver dollar a comforting weight against my leg. They know now, I said to the quiet air. About the store, about what you did. James isn't happy. Mom is, trying. The others will come around, or they won't. Either way, I'm okay. I looked out over the town, the gathering dusk painting. The buildings in soft gold. You taught me more than just how to run a hardware store, Grandpa. You taught me that true wealth isn't what other people think you have. It's knowing the value of what you already possess. I placed a small stone. On top of the headstone, a tradition he had taught me when we visited his parents' graves. Rest well. I've got this now. Winter came, bringing snow that blanketed the town in hushed white. Business slowed, as it always did in the coldest months, but didn't stop. Pipes froze and needed thawing. Heaters failed and required parts. Snow shovels broke and demanded replacement. The rhythm of the store changed with the seasons, just as it always had. James didn't return, but I received a formal letter from Oak Ridge Development in December, offering once more to purchase the property, this time at double the original price. I wrote back, equally formal, declining the offer and requesting that they direct any future correspondence to Mr. Finch. There was no response. The house that had gone to James in the will remained empty. Occasionally I drove past it, noting the untended yard, the darkened windows, the absence that seemed to hover around it like a mist. I felt no regret, no longing for the structure itself. The memories it contained lived in me now, not in its walls or floors. Just after New Year's, a young man came into the store. He was perhaps 25, dressed in work clothes, with calloused hands and earnest eyes. "Ms. Morgan," he asked, approaching the counter where I was updating inventory records. "That's me," I confirmed. "What can I help you with today?" "My name's Daniel Cooper. I just bought the old Williams place on Oak Street. Needs a lot of work." He shifted, slightly nervous. "I was hoping to find someone who could give me some advice. The real estate agent said you might be able to help." I smiled, setting aside my paperwork. "What kind of work does the place need?" "Everything," he admitted with a rueful laugh. "Plumbing, electrical, new floors, windows that actually close. I've done some construction, but never a whole house. I'm a bit overwhelmed." I came around the counter, leading him toward the tools section. "Well, the first rule of renovation is to tackle one project at a time. Let's start with what you'll need for the basics, and we can go from there." For the next hour, I walked Daniel through the store, helping him select tools appropriate for a beginner, explaining the differences between types of drywall and insulation, sketching out a rough timeline for how to approach the renovation in manageable stages. His enthusiasm was infectious, his questions thoughtful, his determination evident. "You know," he said as I rang up his purchases, "everyone told me I was crazy to buy that old place. Said it was too far gone, that I should just build new or buy something modern. But there's something about those old houses, you know? The craftsmanship, the character. They don't make them like that anymore." I nodded, understanding completely. People often undervalue what can be restored, what can be saved with just a little patience and the right tools. He loaded his supplies into a battered pickup truck, promising to return the following weekend for more advice and probably more supplies. As I watched him drive away, I felt a sense of continuity, of purpose. This was what Grandfather had protected. Not just a business, but a resource for the community, a place where knowledge was passed on, where projects took shape, where people found what they needed to build and repair their lives. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it increased business and unexpected news. Mr. Finch called one morning in April, his voice unusually animated. "Eliza, do you have a moment to stop by my office today? There's something you should know." I went during my lunch break, curious about the urgency in his tone. He greeted me warmly, ushering me into his office where a familiar folder sat on his desk. "I received a call from James yesterday," he began, settling into his chair. "Apparently, he's been trying to sell your grandfather's house since the will was executed, but hasn't had any serious offers. It's an older home, needs updating, and the market has been slow." I nodded, unsurprised. The house had charm but required maintenance that many modern buyers weren't willing to undertake. "What is surprising," Mr. Finch continued, "is that James has decided to donate the property to the town, with the stipulation that it be used for community purposes. A library annex, perhaps, or a senior center. He mentioned that he thought your grandfather would approve." I sat back, genuinely shocked. "James is donating the house? Not selling it?" Mr. Finch smiled slightly. "It seems your uncle has had a change of heart, or at least a change of strategy. He asked me to draw up the paperwork. And he specifically requested that you be consulted on what the house should become, given your connection to the community." "I don't understand," I admitted. "This doesn't sound like James at all." "People can surprise us," Mr. Finch observed, adjusting his glasses. "Perhaps losing the store made him reconsider the house. Or perhaps he simply realized that some inheritances come with responsibilities as well as privileges." I considered this, thinking of the house with its wraparound porch and large rooms, its central location and sturdy bones. "A community center," I said slowly. "A place where people could gather, learn new skills, connect with neighbors. Grandpa would have liked that." "That's what I thought too," Mr. Finch agreed. "I told James the first would discuss it with you before proceeding." I nodded, ideas already forming. "Tell him yes. And tell him thank you. From me." That evening, after closing the store, I walked through town to the lake where Grandfather and I had spent so many Wednesday afternoons. The dock was showing signs of age, a few boards warped from winter ice, the surface weathered by sun and rain. I sat at the edge, feet dangling above the water, watching the sunset paint the surface in streaks of orange and gold. I thought about inheritance, not just what we receive, but what we choose to do with it. Grandfather had left me more than a store. He had left me a way of seeing the world, of valuing what endures, of recognizing the difference between price and worth. And now, in his own way, James was doing the same with the house, transforming what could have been a simple real estate transaction into something that would serve the community for years to come. The silver dollar weighed in my pocket, a tangible reminder of continuity and change. I took it out, turning it over in the fading light, feeling the worn edges, the slight imperfections that made it unique. Not just currency, but history. Not just metal, but meaning. As darkness fell, I rose and walked back toward town, toward the store that had been in my family for generations, toward the future I was building one day, one customer, one repair at a time. The path was familiar, the destination certain. I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by an inheritance more valuable than anything that could be counted or catalogued: purpose, community, the knowledge that what I did mattered. At the will reading, they had laughed when I got $1. But I had already owned everything that truly mattered. And now, finally, I understood the full measure of my grandfather's gift. Not just the business or the building, but the wisdom. To recognize true value when others saw only price tags. That was the real inheritance, one that could never be taken away, only shared and multiplied as it passed from one generation to the next. The store lights glowed ahead, a beacon in the gathering dark. I quickened my pace, keys in hand, eager to return to the place that was not just my livelihood but my legacy. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to build something lasting in a world that too often favored the temporary. I was ready. More than ready. I was home. 2 years passed, bringing changes to our town that no one could have predicted. The community center in grandfather's old house became the heart of the neighborhood, hosting classes in everything from basic home repairs to computer skills for seniors. I taught a monthly workshop there on home maintenance, showing people how to fix leaky faucets, replace broken light switches, and patch drywall. The satisfaction of passing on what grandfather had taught me was immeasurable, a continuation of his legacy that extended beyond the walls of the hardware store. Daniel Cooper, the young man who had bought the old Williams place, became a regular at both the store and my workshops. His renovation project progressed steadily, each improvement tackled with growing confidence and skill. He started bringing others with him to the classes, friends and neighbors who had once been intimidated by the thought of picking up a tool. If I can learn this, he would tell them, anyone can. The store itself evolved too. I added a small coffee station near the front, creating a space where contractors could gather in the early mornings to discuss projects and share advice. I expanded our selection of environmentally friendly products, responding to growing interest in sustainable living. And I hired 2 part-time employees, local teenagers eager to learn the business from the ground up, just as I had once done. Through it all, the silver dollar remained in my pocket, a talisman and a reminder. I rarely took it out anymore, but I always knew it was there, a physical connection to grandfather and to the wisdom he had shared. Its presence was constant, comforting, a private inheritance that no one could see but that shaped everything I did. Uncle James never returned to the store, but we developed a cautious, distant respect. He sent a card on the anniversary of grandfather's death, just a simple note acknowledging the day. I responded with a photograph of the community center in full swing, children and adults alike gathered in the living room where grandfather had once sat in his favorite chair. No words were necessary. We both understood what had been preserved, what had been transformed. My mother visited more often, our relationship slowly rebuilding. She still didn't fully understand my choices, but she had stopped questioning them, had started seeing the value in the life I had built. Sometimes she would sit in the store for hours, watching me help customers, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You remind me of him," she said once. "Dad. The way you listen to people, really listen. I never had that patience." I took it as the compliment it was meant to be. "Different strengths," I replied. "Different paths." It was on a Wednesday in early summer, exactly 2 years after I had opened that envelope in the back office, that everything shifted again. The day began normally enough. I opened at 7, served coffee to the regulars, helped Mrs. Peterson find new hinges for her bathroom cabinet. The morning passed in a pleasant rhythm of customers and tasks, the familiar dance of retail and service that had become as natural to me as breathing. Around noon, a stranger entered the store. She was perhaps in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that took in everything with keen intelligence. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, but something in her posture, her deliberate movements, suggested purpose rather than casual browsing. "Can I help you find something?" I asked as she approached the counter. She smiled, extending her hand. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you, Ms. Morgan. My name is Caroline Reeves. I'm a writer for National Community Business Magazine. We're doing a feature on family-owned businesses that have successfully adapted to changing economies while maintaining their core values. Your store was recommended to us by several sources. I shook her hand, surprised. That's flattering. But I'm not sure we're what you're looking for. We're just a small-town hardware store. That's exactly what we're looking for, she countered, pulling out a small notebook. Businesses that serve as anchors in their communities, that have found ways to thrive when similar establishments are closing across the country. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? Maybe show me around? I hesitated, never having sought publicity for the store. But something in her sincere interest made me nod. I close at noon on Wednesdays, actually. An old tradition my grandfather started. If you can wait about 15 minutes, I could give you a proper tour. That would be perfect, she agreed, moving aside to let me help a customer who had approached with a question about lawn mower parts. After closing, I showed Caroline around the store, explaining the layout that had remained essentially unchanged. Since the 1960s, the inventory system that balanced traditional hardware with newer, eco-friendly options, the community bulletin board where locals posted everything from job openings to lost pet notices. The store is more than just a place to buy things, I explained as we walked. It's a resource center, a meeting place, sometimes even a classroom. We hold demonstrations on weekends, teach people how to use tools safely, how to tackle projects they might otherwise hire out. Caroline took notes, asking thoughtful questions about business challenges, about how I had maintained customer loyalty in an age of big-box stores and online shopping. What's your secret? She asked finally. Why has Morgan's Hardware survived when so many similar businesses have failed? I considered the question, wanting to give her more than platitudes about customer service or community engagement. I think it's about understanding what you're really selling, I said finally. Yes, we stock hammers and nails and paint. But what people are really buying is confidence. The ability to fix something with their own hands, to take care of their homes, to solve problems. That's what my grandfather taught me, and it's what I try to pass on to every customer who walks through that door. She nodded, writing quickly. And what about succession planning? Do you have children who will take over someday, or are you mentoring someone to continue the Morgan legacy? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on preserving what grandfather had built, on proving that his faith in me was justified, that I hadn't thought much about what would come after me. No children, I admitted. But I've started training local teenagers, teaching them the business. Not just inventory and accounting, but the intangibles. How to listen to what customers are really asking for, how to suggest solutions they might not have considered, how to build relationships that last decades, not just transactions. Investing in the next generation, Caroline observed. Even if they aren't family by blood. Family comes in many forms, I replied. Grandfather understood that. He left the store to me, not because I was his granddaughter, but because I shared his vision for what it could be. After the interview, Caroline asked to take some photographs of the store and of me behind the counter. For the article, she explained. Readers connect more strongly with images of real people in their workplaces. I agreed, somewhat self-consciously. When she finished, she thanked me warmly and promised to send a draft of the article before publication. This is exactly the kind of story we want to tell, she said. Not just business survival, but community preservation. You're building something important here, Ms. Morgan. After she left, I locked up as usual and began my weekly ritual, the drive to the lake in grandfather's old blue pickup, which I had kept running through careful maintenance and stubborn determination. The afternoon was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze rippling the water as I sat on the dock, unwrapping the sandwich I had made that morning. Caroline's questions lingered in my mind, particularly the one about succession. Who would continue what grandfather had started, what I had maintained and expanded? The teenagers I was training were bright and capable, but they had plans for college, for careers that would likely take them far from our small town. Daniel Cooper showed promise and genuine interest, but he had his own business to run, his own dreams to pursue. For the first time, I felt a flutter of uncertainty about the future. Not regret, never that, but awareness that what I had built required planning beyond the next inventory order or seasonal sale. Grandfather had secured my inheritance through careful foresight. Shouldn't I do the same for whoever would come after me? The following week brought an unexpected development. The article about Morgan's Hardware appeared in National Community Business magazine, featuring a full-page photograph of me standing in front of the store, the faded green awning and hand-painted sign visible above my head. The piece was thoughtful, emphasizing the store's role as a community hub rather than just a retail establishment, highlighting the workshops and the coffee station and the bulletin board as examples of adaptation in a changing market. What I hadn't anticipated was the response. Emails began arriving from readers across the country, many of them owners of small businesses facing similar challenges, asking for advice or simply sharing their own stories of perseverance. A local television station called, requesting an interview for a segment on successful rural enterprises. The mayor stopped by, suggesting that the store's approach could serve as a model for other businesses in town. The attention was flattering but overwhelming. I had never sought the spotlight, had simply tried to honor Grandfather's legacy by doing what he had taught me, taking care of the store, taking care of the community, building something that would last. Now, suddenly, people were looking to me as some kind of business sage, a keeper of wisdom that extended beyond hardware and home repair. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from a professor at the State University's business school, expressing interest in bringing students to visit Morgan's Hardware as part of a course on sustainable small business practices. Your approach represents a viable alternative to the standard narrative of expansion or extinction, the professor wrote. Our students would benefit greatly from seeing firsthand how a traditional business can adapt without compromising its core values. I responded cautiously, agreeing to a visit but emphasizing that I was no expert, just a second-generation shopkeeper trying to maintain what my grandfather had built. The professor's reply was immediate and enthusiastic. That's precisely what makes your perspective valuable. You've found a middle path between rigid tradition and wholesale reinvention. Our students need to understand that success isn't always measured in scale or growth rates. The visit was scheduled for the following month, a Saturday afternoon when the store would normally be busy but not overwhelmed. I prepared carefully, organizing the stockroom for viewing, gathering sales data that demonstrated the store's steady if modest profitability, creating a simple presentation about our community engagement efforts. The day of the visit arrived, bringing 12 business students and their professor, all armed with notebooks and curious expressions. I welcomed them somewhat nervously, unused to formal presentations or academic scrutiny. But as I began speaking about the store's history, its evolution over the decades, the strategies that had kept it relevant in changing times, I found myself relaxing into the role of teacher, drawing on stories and lessons Grandfather had shared with me. The biggest mistake businesses make, I told them as we stood among the neatly organized aisles, is forgetting why they exist in the first place. It's easy to get caught up in metrics and margins, in competitors and market share. But at its heart, every successful business fills a need. Understand that need, truly. Understand it, and you'll never lack for customers. The students asked insightful questions about inventory management, about pricing strategies in a market dominated by volume discounts, about competing with online retailers who could offer lower prices and next-day delivery. I answered honestly, acknowledging the challenges while emphasizing the advantages of local presence, immediate availability, and personalized service. The internet can't show you how to replace a washer in your specific faucet model, I pointed out. It can't suggest 3 different solutions based on your skill level and budget. It can't remember that your back door always sticks in humid weather. Those relationships, that knowledge, that's our competitive edge. And it can't be outsourced or automated. After the formal tour, several students lingered, examining products, asking additional questions, taking photographs for their class project. One young woman approached me as the others were preparing to leave. Miss Morgan, she began hesitantly, I grew up in a small town like this. My parents ran the local pharmacy until a chain store opened on the highway and drove them out of business. I always thought that was inevitable, that small businesses like theirs, like yours, were doomed. And now? I prompted gently. She gestured around the store, at the customers browsing, at the coffee station where 2 elderly men were engaged in animated conversation, at the workshop schedule posted by the door. Now I'm not so sure. You've created something different. Here. Something that big corporations can't easily replicate. It's not just me, I told her. It's generations of knowledge, of community building. My grandfather understood that a business isn't just a place where money changes hands. It's a relationship, a commitment. He passed that understanding to me, and I'm trying to pass it on to others. Her expression turned thoughtful. That's the part they don't teach us in business school. The human element. The history. Maybe they should, I suggested. Because ultimately, that's what sustainability really means. Not just economic viability, but cultural continuity, social connection. The ability to pass something valuable from one generation to the next. After the students departed, I found myself thinking about that conversation, about continuity and connection, about what it truly meant to inherit something worth preserving. The silver dollar weighed in my pocket, a physical reminder of grandfather's foresight, of his determination to protect what mattered most. That evening, after closing the store, I drove not to the lake but to the cemetery on the hill. Grandfather's grave was no longer fresh, the grass now grown evenly over the plot, the headstone weathering gently into the landscape. I stood there in the golden light of early evening, hands in my pockets, feeling the comforting weight of the coin against my fingers. I never thanked you properly, I said to the quiet air. Not just for the store, but for the trust. For seeing in me something I didn't fully see in myself. A bird called from a nearby tree, the sound clear and sweet in the stillness. They came to learn from me today. Students, future business owners. I told them what you taught me. About value and worth, about building something that lasts. I knelt, touching the cool stone briefly. I'm thinking about the future now. About who comes after me, about how to secure what we've built. You planned so carefully to protect my inheritance. I want to do the same for whoever comes next. I'm just not sure yet who that will be. Rising, I looked out over the town spread below, the familiar streets and buildings bathed in sunset light. From this vantage point, I could see the hardware store, the community center in grandfather's old house, the renovated Williams place where Daniel Cooper now lived. Connected spaces, shared history, the tangible manifestation of what grandfather had protected and what I had continued to build. The answer came not in a flash of insight but in a quiet certainty, a rightness that settled in me like the foundation of a well-built house. Not a single successor, but many. Not one inheritance, but a community of heirs, each carrying forward a piece of what grandfather had created. The following week, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to Mr. Finch, scheduling a meeting to discuss the creation of a business trust that would eventually convert Morgan's Hardware into a community-owned cooperative. The second was to the business school professor, proposing a more formal partnership, an internship program that would bring students to the store not just to observe but to participate, to learn the business from the inside out. Both conversations were met with enthusiasm. Mr. Finch immediately saw the potential of the trust structure to preserve the store's mission while allowing for shared ownership and collective decision-making. The professor recognized the educational value of placing students in a successful small business environment, where theory could meet practice in meaningful ways. As summer turned to fall, the plans took shape. Legal documents were drafted, outlining how the transition would work, how current employees and community members could become stakeholders, how decisions would be made once the conversion was complete. The first interns were selected, 3. Students with diverse backgrounds but a shared interest in sustainable business practices. Daniel Cooper became an unexpected ally in the process, offering insights from his own experience as a small business owner, suggesting refinements to the cooperative structure, volunteering to serve as a mentor to the interns. What you're doing makes sense, he told me as we discussed the plans over coffee one morning. It's not about preserving a single family's ownership. It's about preserving what the store means to this community. The day I signed the trust documents was ordinary in every other respect. The store was busy, the weather mild, the tasks of the day no different than any other. But as I sat in Mr. Finch's office, adding my signature to the papers that would eventually transform Morgan's Hardware from a family business to a community institution, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Of completion. Your grandfather would approve, Mr. Finch said as he witnessed the signatures. He was always thinking ahead, planning for contingencies, ensuring that what mattered would endure. He taught me well, I agreed, watching as the documents were notarized and filed. Not just about hardware or business, but about legacy. About understanding the difference between ownership and stewardship. That evening, I closed the store at the usual time, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me. But instead of going directly upstairs to my apartment, I walked through town to the community center in grandfather's old house. A class was in progress in the main room, local residents learning basic electrical repairs under Daniel's patient guidance. I stood in the doorway, watching as he demonstrated how to replace an outlet, his hands steady, his explanations clear. In that moment, the full circle of inheritance became clear to me. What grandfather had protected wasn't just a building or a business, but a way of being in the world. A commitment to knowledge shared rather than hoarded, to value recognized rather than exploited, to community strengthened rather than divided. He had seen those qualities in me and had ensured that I would have the resources to nurture them in others. The silver dollar rested in my pocket, its weight familiar and comforting. No longer just a keepsake or a talisman, but a symbol of continuity, of promises kept and renewed. What looked to others like a single dollar at a will reading had been, in truth, the outward sign of a far greater inheritance, the understanding that true wealth lies not in what you possess alone, but in what you preserve for others. As I turned to leave, Daniel spotted me and smiled, raising a hand in greeting. I nodded in return, recognizing in his enthusiasm, his care for details, his willingness to teach, echoes of what grandfather had passed to me. The circle widening, the legacy extending, one lesson, one skill, one connection at a time. Outside, the evening was settling over the town, stars appearing in the deepening blue above. I walked slowly back toward the store, toward the home I had made above it, toward the future I was now helping to shape. The path was clear, the purpose certain. At the will reading, they had laughed when I got $1, not understanding that I already owned everything that truly mattered. Now, I was ensuring that others would share in that inheritance, that what grandfather had built and I had maintained would continue to serve and sustain long after I was gone. The store stood waiting, solid and familiar in the gathering dusk. I paused before entering, looking up at the sign that had hung there for decades, the name that represented not just a family but a tradition of service and integrity. Morgan's Hardware. Soon to be Morgan's Community Hardware Cooperative. A subtle change in name, a profound shift in structure, but an unbroken line of purpose and commitment. I unlocked the door one more time, stepping into the quiet space that had shaped my life in ways I once could not have imagined. Tomorrow would bring customers and questions, deliveries and decisions, the ordinary business of a day that, taken together with all the days before and after, formed something extraordinary, a legacy not just received, but actively, intentionally passed forward. This, I knew with absolute certainty, was the greatest inheritance of all. 5 years passed in a blur of growth and transformation. Morgan's Community Hardware Cooperative became not just a reality but a model studied by business schools and community development organizations across the country. What had begun as a single store's transition evolved into a movement, with similar businesses in neighboring towns adopting our structure, our principles, our commitment to balancing commerce with community. The morning of our 5th anniversary. As a cooperative dawned bright and clear, a perfect late September day with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. I arrived at the store earlier than usual, wanting a quiet moment before the celebration scheduled for that afternoon. The building looked much the same from the outside, the green awning freshly painted but unchanged in design, the wooden sign weathered but still proudly displaying the Morgan name. Inside, though, subtle transformations were evident everywhere. The original wooden counters remained, but now they supported modern point-of-sale systems that tracked inventory in real time. The coffee station had expanded into a proper seating area where customers could consult with staff about projects or simply enjoy conversation with neighbors. The workshop space at the back had been renovated to accommodate larger classes, with proper lighting and ventilation and tools organized on pegboards painted with their outlines for easy return. I ran my hand along the edge of the main counter, feeling the smoothness worn into the wood by decades of transactions, of conversations, of problems solved and projects begun. Grandfather's counter, now mine, soon to belong to everyone who participated in the cooperative. The transition was happening gradually, exactly as planned. Current employees had the option to convert a portion of their salary into ownership shares. Community members could invest directly or earn shares through volunteer hours. The business school internship program had become a pipeline for future managers and co-owners, bringing fresh ideas while honoring established traditions. Daniel Cooper was now the store's assistant manager, balancing his time between his own renovation business and his growing role at Morgan's. He had surprised me with his business acumen, his intuitive understanding of what made the store special, his commitment to preserving its essence while adapting to changing needs. "You reminded me of what's possible," he had told me once. "That you don't have to choose between tradition and innovation. You can honor the past while building something new." The silver dollar remained in my pocket, a daily companion though I rarely took it out anymore. Its presence had become so familiar that I sometimes forgot it was there, only to be reminded when its weight shifted against my leg as I moved. A physical manifestation of continuity, of promises kept, of values maintained through changing circumstances. The bell above the door chimed, interrupting my reverie. I looked up to see Mr. Finch entering, earlier than I had expected him for the day's celebrations. At 78, he moved more slowly now but still maintained his law practice, still wore his bow ties and round glasses, still served as a living connection to grandfather and his foresight. "Good morning, Eliza," he greeted me, approaching the counter with a small package tucked under one arm. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I assured him. "Just having a quiet moment before things get busy. The mayor's coming at noon, and the business school dean, and apparently a film crew from that public television documentary series." He nodded, placing the package on the counter between us. "I thought I should give you this before the crowds arrive. It's the final item from your grandfather's safety deposit box. He left specific instructions that it should be given to you today, 5 years after the creation of the trust." I looked at the package with surprise. There was something else in the box? All this time? A sealed envelope with a note on the outside indicating the date for delivery, Mr. Finch confirmed. "I've kept it in my office safe since we emptied the box to create the trust documents." The package was wrapped in brown paper and tied with simple string, grandfather's preferred method for parcels of any kind. "Fancy wrapping is just waste," he used to say. "It's what's inside that matters." My hands trembled slightly as I untied the string and removed the paper, revealing a small wooden box with a hinged lid, handcrafted from cherry wood that glowed with a warm patina of age and care. I opened the box slowly. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a silver pocket watch, its case engraved with intricate scrollwork surrounding a blank oval that seemed designed for a monogram or inscription. Beside it was an envelope addressed simply, "Eliza." Mr. Finch stepped back, giving me privacy. "I'll go get some coffee from across the street," he said quietly. "Take your time." When he had gone, I lifted the watch from the box, feeling its substantial weight in my palm. It was clearly old, possibly antique, but had been well maintained, the silver polished to a soft gleam. I opened the case to reveal the watch face, white enamel with black Roman numerals, blue steel hands, and a smaller dial for seconds. The watch was running, the second hand making its steady circuit, marking time as it had for perhaps a century or more. Setting the watch aside, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was the same cream stationery grandfather had used for his previous letter, the handwriting immediately familiar. "My dearest Eliza," it began. "If you're reading this, then 5 years have passed since you established the trust for Morgan's Hardware, and the transition to community ownership is well underway. I wish I could be there to see it, to witness what you've built on the foundation I left you. But in a way, I am there, through you, through the values we shared, through the community we both served." I paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the familiar ache of his absence even after all these years. The watch enclosed with this letter has its own story, its own legacy. It belonged to my grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, Elias Morgan. He carried it when he opened the first Morgan store in 1892, not a hardware store then but a general mercantile that served the farmers and tradespeople of our growing town. The watch passed to his son, then to my father, then to me. I had intended to give it to you on the day you took full ownership of the store, but as you know, life had other plans for us. I glanced at the watch, seeing it now not just as an heirloom but as a symbol of continuity, a physical connection to generations I had never known but whose legacy I had been carrying forward. Elias believed that a business was only as valuable as its contribution to the community it served. "Time spent solely in pursuit of profit," he used to say, "is time wasted." The watch was his reminder that every moment could be invested in building something larger than himself, something that would outlast him. It became the Morgan family motto, passed down alongside the timepiece itself. I turned the watch over, noticing for the first time a small inscription on the back of the case, the letters worn but still legible, "Time given, not taken." By now, the letter continued, "You will have discovered the inscription." Simple words that guided 4 generations of our family through economic upheavals, technological revolutions, and changing communities. Time given, not taken. Service rather than extraction. Building rather than depleting. These principles sustained the business through the Great Depression, through 2 world wars, through the arrival of chain stores and online retailers. And I have every confidence they will continue to guide whatever Morgan's becomes under your stewardship. My vision blurred slightly as tears threatened. I blinked them away, continuing to read. The watch is yours now, to carry or to display or simply to keep as a reminder of where you came from and what you're building toward. The blank oval on the front was left uninscribed by Elias, who believed that each generation should add its own mark, its own contribution to the legacy. My father added a small diamond at the bottom of the oval, nearly invisible unless you know to look for it. I added a tiny emerald at the top, my favorite stone and a symbol of growth. What you add is entirely your choice. I examined the front of the watch case more carefully, noticing now the small gemstones embedded in the silver, so subtle they seemed part of the original design unless viewed in just the right light. 5 years ago, when you read my first letter, you learned that I had secured your inheritance by transferring ownership of the store to you before anyone could challenge it. What I didn't tell you then, because you weren't ready to hear it, was that the transfer was never about ensuring your personal ownership. It was about ensuring that you would have the authority, the security, and the time to transform ownership itself. I sat down on the stool behind the counter, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. I watched you grow up, Eliza. I saw how you understood instinctively what took me decades to learn, that a business isn't property to be hoarded but a resource to be shared, a platform for community resilience, a vehicle for passing knowledge from one generation to the next. The store was never the true inheritance. It was merely the vessel for something far more valuable, a way of being in the world that measures wealth not in dollars but in relationships, in skills shared, in problems solved together. The bell above the door chimed again. I glanced up to see Daniel entering, a box of donuts in one hand, a tray of coffee cups in the other. He noticed the watch, the letter, my expression, and immediately backed toward the door. Sorry, he whispered. I'll come back. I shook my head, gesturing for him to stay but to give me a moment. He nodded, setting the breakfast items on a side table and busying himself with straightening a display that didn't need straightening. I returned to the letter, to grandfather's final message. The cooperative structure you've created, and I have no doubt that by now you have created it, represents the culmination of the Morgan legacy. Not the end of our family's connection to the business, but its evolution into something more profound, more enduring than any single family could sustain. You've taken what was given to you and multiplied it by sharing it. There is no greater success I could have wished for you or for the store. The final paragraph was written in a slightly shakier hand, perhaps added later or on a different day. I have one last request, though you are of course free to decline it. The will reading, with its $1 and its apparent disinheritance, was a necessary deception, a strategy to protect what mattered most. But strategies outlive their usefulness, and secrets can become burdens rather than protections. Consider, if you haven't already, sharing the full story with the family, with the community, with all who will carry the Morgan legacy forward. Not out of vindication or pride, but because the truth of what we built together deserves to be known. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you, that I love you, and that you have exceeded every hope I had for the future of Morgan's Hardware. Always, Grandpa. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, then lifted the watch once more, feeling its weight, its history, its unbroken connection to generations who had built something worth preserving. Time given, not taken. 5 simple words that contained an entire philosophy of business, of community, of life itself. Everything okay? Daniel asked quietly, still standing by the display he had been pretending to arrange. I nodded, gesturing for him to join me at the counter. My grandfather left this for me, I explained, showing him the watch. It's been in the family since 1892, passed down through 5 generations. He examined it with respect, careful not to touch. It's beautiful. And still running after all this time. Because each generation maintained it, I said, understanding flowing through me. Fixed what was broken, cleaned what was tarnished, wound it regularly so it wouldn't stop. Just like the store. Daniel smiled. Just like the store. He hesitated, then added, Mr. Finch told me about the article they're planning for the Business Journal, about the full story of your inheritance. Are you sure you want to share all that? The will reading, the dollar, the transfer? It might stir up old feelings with your family. I considered the question, remembering grandfather's final request. The truth deserves to be known, I said, echoing his words. Not to embarrass anyone or to claim some kind of victory, but because the story itself has value. It shows that inheritance isn't always what it appears to be, that wealth can take forms that don't register in bank accounts or property deeds. I like that, Daniel nodded. It's a different kind of success story than the ones we usually hear. The morning continued, the store gradually filling with employees arriving for their shifts, with the first customers of the day, with preparations for the afternoon celebration. I kept the watch in my pocket, next to the silver dollar. The 2 pieces of my inheritance nestled together, anchoring me as I moved through the increasingly busy space. At noon, the mayor arrived, followed by the dean of the business school, the head of the state's Small Business Development Center, and a host of local residents and cooperative members. The television crew set up in the corner, capturing footage of the store in operation, conducting brief interviews with staff and customers about what Morgan's meant to them. Eventually, the mayor called for attention, standing on a small platform we had set up for the occasion. He spoke eloquently about the store's history, its evolution, its importance to the community. The business school dean followed, describing the internship program and its impact on students' understanding of sustainable enterprise. Various community members shared stories of projects completed with the store's help, of skills learned in its workshops, of connections made across generations through shared knowledge. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I had prepared notes, planning to focus on the cooperative's financial stability, its expanding membership, its plans for the future. But as I stepped onto the platform, the watch and coin shifting in my pocket, I found myself setting the notes aside. 5 years ago, I began. Many of you attended a different kind of gathering. A will reading where, according to all appearances, I received nothing but a symbolic dollar while the family business I had helped run for 15 years was transferred to a development corporation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, surprise at my directness about a topic that had been the subject of gossip but rarely open discussion. What none of you knew, what I didn't know myself until afterward, was that my grandfather had already transferred ownership of the store to me 5 years earlier. The will reading was a strategy, a protection, a way to ensure that what he valued most would be preserved. I reached into my pocket, withdrawing the silver dollar and holding it up for all to see. This is the dollar from the will. Not a modern bill, but a silver coin from 1962, the year my grandfather took over the store from his father. He carried it every day of his working life as a reminder that true value isn't always obvious, that what matters most can't always be measured in conventional terms. The crowd was silent now, attentive, perhaps understanding for the first time the full scope of what had transpired. I share this story today not to claim any kind of personal triumph, but because it represents something larger than one family's business succession. It represents a different way of thinking about inheritance, about legacy, about what we pass from one generation to the next. I replaced the dollar in my pocket and withdrew the watch, opening the case to reveal the still functioning mechanism inside. This watch belonged to my great-great-grandfather, who opened the first Morgan store in 1892. It has been maintained, repaired, and passed down through 5 generations, each adding their own small mark to its case. I turned it to show the inscription on the back. Time given, not taken. That was his philosophy, and it has guided our family's approach to business for over a century. I looked out at the faces watching me, employees who were now part owners, customers who were now community investors, students who were future cooperative members, and felt a profound sense of continuity and evolution. Today, as we celebrate 5 years as a cooperative, we're not just marking a change in legal structure or ownership model. We're celebrating the expansion of that philosophy beyond one family to encompass an entire community. Each of you who works here, who shops here, who learns here, who invests here is now part of that legacy. You are all, in the truest sense, inheritors of what Morgan's has always been, not just a store, but a commitment to sharing knowledge, to building skills, to creating the conditions for collective resilience and individual empowerment. The mayor stepped forward, handing me a framed proclamation declaring the day Morgan's Community Hardware Cooperative Day in our town. The business school dean presented a plaque recognizing the store's contribution to experiential education. A representative from the state's Cooperative Development Agency announced a grant to help us document and share our transition model with other businesses considering similar paths. As the formal presentations concluded and the gathering shifted to a more casual celebration, with cake and coffee and continued conversations, I found a quiet moment to step outside, to feel the autumn sun on my face, to look at the building that had been the center of my life for so long. Uncle James stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching the activity through the store windows. Uncle James, I greeted him, neither warm nor cool, simply acknowledging his presence. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Quite a crowd in there. Quite a story you told them. The truth deserved to be known, I said, echoing grandfather's words. After all this time, Dad always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else, James said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. I spent years thinking I had outmaneuvered him, only to discover he had already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. It wasn't about winning, I countered gently. It was about preserving something he believed in. Something I believe in too. James gestured toward the store, the cooperative members visible through the windows, the sense of community and celebration evident even from outside. You've done well with it. Better than I would have. Better than any developer could have. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I came to tell you that the community center in Dad's old house is being expanded. The town council approved funding for an addition, a dedicated space for teaching practical skills, home repair, basic construction, the kind of knowledge that used to be passed down naturally but isn't anymore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.